Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We are about to begin episode 29 of the Blowback Roundtable. We have two great guests today. Larry Johnson is with us. He is former CIA and former State Department, but don't worry, that was before. Max Parry is also with us, I believe, in New York.
That's correct.
Thank you very much for joining us, guys. I want to just start off discussing the title of our program. So we use the title "Handing Out the Knives," and maybe we can, kind of discuss that a little bit. So this was a quote from one of the Chinese officials who had a press conference with Shoigu. It was yesterday or the day before. It's a very recent quote, but they were just describing the West's approach to foreign policy days and how they're seemingly trying to maintain their hegemony by creating chaos and handing out, knives to all of their proxies and just causing a big problem. So, I mean, we see that in Ukraine, of course. We see it going on in Israel. So anybody have any thoughts about that want to either agree or disagree with this quote from the Chinese official?
Well, I would say that over the years, the United States has become less nuanced, less subtle. It's always sort of been the U.S. policy in the aftermath of World War II, during the Cold War, to play the divide and conquer game. So, for example, in the 1980s, the United States was simultaneously providing weapons to the government of Iran, which was being run by the Ayatollah Khomeini, and providing weapons, technical advice to Iraq, which was using chemical weapons against Iran, and vice versa. So we were funding both sides of that, and it was all done as part of a broader objective to undermine Russia, or the then Soviet Union. Well, now we jump ahead 20 years, 30 years later. What I see the United States doing, it has only two go-to tools. Tool number one, sanctions. If you don't do what we want, we're going to sanction you. And then tool number two is we're going to send in military force. The whole concept of diplomacy is really evaporated. I mean, with the exception of, Donald Trump sort of stands out as an example of the exception to what has been the dominant culture in DC, which I think is one of the reasons the establishment hated him. But he was willing to try to make a deal with anybody. But that's one of the reasons they put up the whole Russia, was involved in stealing the election, just to cut off Trump from being able to talk to Putin and to the Russians. Because we can't, if we have peace between the United States, Russia, and China, no way you can justify an $850 billion defense bill.
True. Plus the increased spending, I think in a year, just the debt of the United States has increased by $1 trillion. I don't know how that's sustainable, but now what is the coalition? At least 50 ships, right, from 14 NATO countries, both the East Mediterranean and the Red Sea. It's just the whole tinderbox is there, kind of ready to explode. The Chinese have their fleet of 6 ships. They're saying it's all standard, it's nothing special. But, Vladimir Putin ordered the 24-hour patrols of the, I think, what Suzhou makes, I don't know, but with the Kinzhal missiles, with a range of over 1,000 kilometers over the Black Sea, which can reach all of this in a cinch. And it looks like the US, I'm not sure, but it's just a reacting. None of this looks like a well-developed, from the outside looking in, a well-developed, this is our next step, that's our achievable goal, and that this is what happens after. It looks like a huge amount of panicking reaction. Just my impression.
Yeah.
Now, Larry, you mentioned sanctions and military force, violence, really, sanctions and violence. But there's some carrots, right? The U.S. has a huge economy still. The dollar, of course, is still the most used currency around the globe. And so they can also, give carrots to countries and say, hey, if we can bribe them, do what we want, and we'll, do this for you, etc.
Well, I think that used to be the case, but it's increasingly what the war in Ukraine has exposed and the sanctions brought against Russia is that the United States is sort of like the Wizard of Oz in the movie. Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain. The great and powerful Oz has spoken. And then you pull back the curtain, you go, no, it's just some little old guy that is pulling some levers that doesn't really have a lot of clout. And that's what the United States is running up against. It used to be able to sort of coerce people into doing what it wanted. That's less and less so, in part because we no longer have an industrial base that can compete with anything that China or Russia have, and the skilled workers in our country are down. And you're right, we're primarily a service industry. So do you want hash browns with your order? That's our expertise now.
Pretty hollow. I mean, that was the first casualty of the Ukraine debacle, which is over. I don't know if anybody of you have had the chance. The economic, Time magazine ran a front cover and a huge story of an interview of Zelensky and his aides, and it just buried the guy. Like, he's holding on to hope, but everybody, who's going to tell him we lost? And we wanted interviews with Oprah. We wanted an interview with Fox News. We can't get them anymore. They just buried that guy. But I was saying the first casualty was this image, the PR value of the undefeatableness of the US and of NATO. Today I watched a video of the very emotional Russians hunting for another Leopard 2, the Leopard 2 tanks. And they were just like, Leopard, jets, and they just, finally it's here, we can destroy it. It's not the undefeatable, untouchable power. And neither is Israel. That's a huge change compared to the 1970s, 80s, even the 2000s.
And most of it was mythology anyway. I'm probably the oldest one here, and I go back to Vietnam, and the United States didn't do very well in any conflict since then, and
that's a bad time to freeze.
Hopefully
we'll
get it. Perfect timing, because it's really went along with saying.
where several dozen engineers, Cuban engineers, held off the force that went in there to throw out the communist Grenadian government. So it's all based on a mythology anyway, and has been for a long time. One of my favorite books is called the Vietnam War, the Perfect War by is it William Gibson, and Techno War in Vietnam. And if you want to read about how you lose a large conflict like that, all you need to do is read that book and the myths created around quantitative systems and reliance on numbers and reports and the number of VC killed and so on and so forth, all flowing back through MACV, and it's been that way since then, and I think there's far too much reliance on these technological approaches, because it spares people from having to be in the field, and it gives them answers that they can give their higher ups without having to confirm them in any genuine sense of the field. But the United States, other than destabilizing countries, has not contributed a victory. Has not had a victory for many decades now. So it's all
just because they win the battle doesn't mean they necessarily win the war. I mean, the long term. I mean, the invasion of Iraq, or even more so in Afghanistan, proved that, and that was the 20-year occupation. The government the puppet government, the narco state that we set up, crumbled within weeks after the U.S. drawdown, and the Ukraine conflict was a perfect off-ramp from that debacle for the Biden administration. And now we're seeing the exact same thing play out here in this sudden abrupt shift away from the Ukraine proxy theater to what's taking place in Gaza, and now this invasion is underway, and it seems inevitable that more and more innocent Palestinians are going to die. But who knows, if other players are drawn in, like Hezbollah, or if Hamas is able to successfully wage asymmetric warfare. Just because Israel on the surface kills tens of thousands of civilians doesn't mean that they're actually necessarily going to be successful with their ultimate objectives. And actually, the last few times that they went into to Gaza or engaged with Hezbollah did not go their way. So
they got beat bad. Yep.
So I'm really curious to see how this is going to play out. Unfortunately, it's going to mean while this is going on, unless the international community is able to step in and somehow stop Israel from doing this, it certainly doesn't seem like the U.S. is going to do anything. I mean, they're just blatantly ignoring the UN resolution and any calls for a ceasefire by Russia and China. But again, just because Israel goes in with this ground invasion doesn't mean they're ultimately going to be successful. And I've seen some people indicating that they believe that this is almost like going to be the death rattle for Israel. There was even a report in 2009 put out by the CIA, hypothesis or putting forth the idea that Israel probably only had realistically a few more decades to exist, and that that it was eventually going to. I mean, we've seen bigger states fall throughout history, right? So it seems to me like it's possible that Israel's days could be numbered in terms of how much longer can they sustain the occupation, and especially with seemingly world opinion, including within the United States, significant upheaval within the Democratic Party, and even among young Republicans, turning the public perception of Israel is changing. And we all know that Israel really cannot do what it's doing without the support of the United States. It's a tiny state there, surrounded by hostile forces. So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. But unfortunately, it's just going to be sickening to see more Palestinians suffering through it.
I want to pick up on that, because the public anger, I mean, I don't remember this at any other previous occasion. It's all over Europe. Like London had the biggest ceasefire anti-war rallies since in the last 20 years. The invasion of Iraq, Afghanistan. That's when they had these kinds of crowds. India, the Hindutva government of Modi is 100% with Israel. But Kerala had their largest, pro-Palestine, and there's especially in the region. I think you've seen the Turkish president, which is kind of ironic. Sultan Erdogan gave this speech with lots of red Turkish flags, and it was the main parking lot of the Atatürk Airport, Kemal Atatürk. Let's switch from the empire, the Ottoman Empire, and become this. Non-secular.
Now he's secular again.
Modern state, and now it's just absolutely. He was talking about reigniting these people want to reignite the war between the crescent and the cross, and this kind of language. And he's riding that wave because that's what he does. He's kind of this dunce.
He's such an opportunist. I mean, he did the same thing after the flotilla raid in 2010. Which killed 8 Turkish nationals, I believe, and then also a Turkish American and one other activist. And I remember, I believe it was a month before Erdogan was up for re-election, even though I know they say that those elections are fishy. But he rode that wave, to mobilize support for his cause. And then once he was re-elected, of course, he did nothing, and even, accepted Netanyahu's apology eventually, and of course worked hand in glove with them, in Syria and stuff like that. So,
Meanwhile,
Erdogan is just such a shameless, conniving.
Yeah, he's
I was going
real.
to say, meanwhile, 40% of Israel's oil is flowing through Turkish carriers, I think, far up from the Caucasus. One of the either, what do you call them, Aliyev's regime and the other one, I don't know where, but that's the source of it. But
And
this
Israel's
public...
a big supporter of Azerbaijan as well.
Yeah. But the big thing is, I don't think this can be ignored by, the Jordanian king, who's always made these overtones to the people, because there's pictures, there's horrific pictures coming in with about the babies killed, families killed, elderly people killed, and there's no escaping it now, even if there's a media blackout. And I don't know about these governments around the region, even those who are reflexively westernized, whether they can hold that back and stay in power.
And it's also a different Middle East. I mean, China has brokered rapprochement between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Whether that's a long-term thing, I don't know. But this ground invasion is going to be taking place under different circumstances. The last 10 years or so, obviously, the West has been fomenting the Sunni-Shia divide. But now it seems like with the increased presence of Russia and China in the region, and even things like Syria being readmitted into the Arab League, there's different alignments that have taken place. I agree. I think there's going to be significant pressure within these countries, even among countries like Jordan or Saudi Arabia or whoever you want to mention that's typically aligned with the West. They're going to be under a lot of political pressure for their own career's sake to stand up for the Palestinians. A lot has changed since the Abraham Accords, with the Trump administration, trying to normalize ties between Israel and the Arab states. I mean, a lot has changed since then, and it doesn't seem like China has really stepped in and changed things in terms of geopolitical alignment. So
Larry,
this really could unite the whole Arab world and all these countries surrounding Israel against it.
That's a good segue to discussing Larry's most recent 2 articles. So the second article was about the Hamas charter. And then your most recent article gave Israel some advice on how to deal with, what's going on. And I really thought that was great advice you gave Israel. What I liked about you pointed out with the Hamas charter, there's a lot of, Hasbara, there's a lot of Israel propaganda saying that, Hamas just hates people that are Jewish. And it's a religious thing, and they just want to kill Jews. They're just psychopathic terrorists that want to kill Jews. And how can we deal with them? We just have to eradicate them. That's the message that Israel puts across. So, when you posted the Hamas charter that was updated in 2017, they make it clear, we don't have anything against Jews. We don't have any problem with people who are Jewish. We have a problem with occupation and, people stealing our land and oppressing us. And so they have a problem, with Zionism. So your advice, I'm going to paraphrase. I'm going to do a really bad job of paraphrasing it, but it was really that Israel needs to work with the emerging global powers of China and Russia and negotiate some kind, because they can't work. The U.S. can't negotiate anything. They need to work with China and Russia to figure out a way to save their state, save the state of Israel, because as it stands now, like Max is saying, it could be their time could be very limited. But Larry, don't let me steal all your thunder, but I stole a little bit. So,
well, the point I was trying to make with that article is you just take Hamas at its word. At its word, there's nothing to negotiate with Israel over, period. Now, they do draw the distinction that they do not equate Jews with Zionists. Zionists are the problem in their view. But Hamas, from its ideological perspective, is not going to negotiate with anybody over anything. So it's just important that the West recognize they are an extremist group. Same thing, though, is going on in Israel. You've got ideological groups in Israel that are just as extreme and uncompromising in their rhetoric about that there can't be any Muslims or Christians in Eretz Israel. Okay. And we've got those kinds of groups here in the United States too. So what my point was that if Israel's making a mistake to say we're going to wipe out Hamas, because when you take that fight out like that and you're killing other Palestinians, you're going to be building support for Hamas, because Hamas is going to be perceived as the only one pushing back, fighting on behalf of the Palestinians. And all of these other, let's call them Arab moderates, who talk a good game but aren't doing anything, are going to lose support. And it is a bit counterintuitive, but Israel's best bet in this would have been to go to China, to Russia, to work quietly behind the scenes, even to back down, to not pursue this direct confrontation, particularly by killing civilians. That they could have found a way that Hamas ultimately can be isolated. Hamas, you cut off their funding, and I've watched this over the years with the United States. They always talk about, follow the money. They never do. In the United States, combating terrorism, they didn't do a damn thing, for example, with ISIS, to stop ISIS getting access to Toyota trucks. I mean, where did the United States think those trucks came from? It didn't fall from the sky like manna. It was sold to people. I mean, I was personally involved with the briefing for the Joint Special Operations Command there was this character up in North Africa called Mokhtar Belmokhtar. And they kept killing the guy. He kept dying every 3 or 4 weeks. Kept coming back, like a cat with 9 lives.
Like Baghdadi,
Yeah.
Oh, Putin died this weekend as well, but he's back.
So we.
I've lost track of how many times Kim Jong-un has been in poor health, and
yeah, I mean, it's part of the Western meme. But my point in this was we knew that the guy's source of funding came from stolen automobiles and contraband cigarettes. What brand? Marlboro, Philip Morris. So we've been involved with investigating cigarette smuggling around the world, knowing that the cigarette company, Philip Morris, was in bed with terrorists and drug cartels. I mean, they knew they were dealing with them. Not, how did that happen? They absolutely knew what they were doing. And so it was a simple matter to follow the money to cut it off. My point in all of this is they never did it there. Israel's never done it with Hamas, because sometimes it's better to have this external enemy that you can use to justify military buildup, military spending. I've become even more cynical now as the years have passed, that all of these different wars the United States has been engaged in over the last 30 years in particular, really at root were an economic war, because when Russia said in the aftermath of the breakup of the Soviet Union, when both Yeltsin and then Putin approached about joining NATO.
Yes, they did.
NATO said, hell no, we let you in. Our reason for existence goes away. I mean, it's sick, but that's what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, Larry, probably more than others that Israel was fundamental in funding Hamas against the PLO, against the sort of secular socialist. Back in 2019, you can find like Bloomberg articles with the title "Netanyahu asked his party, the Likud, to support them monetarily where you can." And at the meantime, he was the candidate. I can secure you. I'm the only one who can keep you safe. Like perfectly, as you said, at the one time funding the enemy to stay in power. Small thought.
Yeah, and we did the same in Syria. We tried to take
White
out
helmets.
Assad by funding some of the same radical Islamists that we claimed that we were fighting the war on terror against. It's just, I said, if you're looking for moral consistency and clear vision on the part of particularly Americans and Europeans, don't hold your breath, because you'll pass out.
Yeah, I think one of the Rambo movies ended with dedicated to the brave Mujahideen.
Yeah.
Well, that turned around kind of 22 years ago. That turned around badly. Yeah.
Yeah, the Biden government is trying to prepare another $130 billion package. And they recently asked a Ukrainian official if the theft by the Ukrainian oligarchs had ceased because the situation's so dire, I mean, very dire, and literally tens of thousands of their people have been killed. Said no, not at all. It's the Monaco battalion is still going after more yachts and more mansions.
That Time magazine featured, they're like, we are cracking down on corruption. Surely nobody does anything wrong. And the guy, one of his unnamed aides, says, no, we're stealing like there's no tomorrow.
That
was
it.
Verbatim in there, which was amazing.
My favorite point about the whole Time magazine article was that a year ago, like you pointed out, Ben, he was Man of the Year. Zelensky was Time's Man of the Year, and now this article is just really saying how the times have changed. But
well, look, I have this fantasy about a movie that would be made where Zelensky has been assassinated, and he walks through the doors of the afterlife, and they're sitting at a table to interview him are Diem of Vietnam, Manuel Noriega, Muammar Gaddafi, and Saddam Hussein. And they talk about their previous great friend, the United States. I mean, let's not forget that in the early days of Saddam Hussein's rule, when they decided to go to war with Iran, and we helped them, he was there arm in arm shaking hands with Donald Rumsfeld. And, so, I mean, we enabled the Iraqis to kill millions of Iranians. So you think Iran might have a reason to be a tad miffed at us because of our previous accessory to murder status. And, you say that most Americans don't want to hear that. We always like to portray Iran as the ultimate bad guy. We're the ultimate good guy. We're minding our own business, and all these crazy rabid Islamic radicals in Iran suddenly attacked us for no good reason. They didn't like us because of our democracy.
As if Mossadegh had never been overthrown, on behalf of BP oil back in the 50s, as if that never happened. It just occurred in a vacuum.
Well, isn't that fascinating that in the Western media, the magazines, the history of this conflict started, they call it 10/7, the 7th of October. That's it. Nothing before that. And the Ukraine conflict started 24th of February, 2022. Nothing before that. That's all you're supposed to focus on. Let me just tell you a joke that I made about a year ago, similar to yours, but what people who are alive. My dream was to have Zelensky, Tikhanovskaya, the Belarusian expat, and the guy Juan Guaido, who's studying, he's teaching at a university somewhere, and they should be in a rental flat somewhere, and it would be like a reality TV show, and all of them cursing, their enemies. And I just watch that every week.
You call it Three's Company, formatted version,
something like that.
Yeah.
Just the new. I want to make one point about the media that I think there's still a mistaken assumption that media coverage on the conventional cable news shows and the networks, the major networks in the United States, remain very relevant. I think with each passing year, they're becoming less relevant, because what's happened is with the spread of social media, that everybody with your own smartphone, you can become your own reporter and recorder. That yes, there is a blackout from official media if you're watching RT or Al Jazeera about what's going on, but it's not being wiped out on TikTok. It's not being wiped out on Telegram. YouTube will try to shut it down, but again, this is like a flood of water running downhill. It's going to find a way to get to the bottom.
But it's been key. It's been key in disproving, a lot of these Israeli allegations about the beheaded babies, and then people are able to see actual dismembered children in the rubble in Gaza. I mean, it's been key to in the propaganda war, because I mean, if it weren't for social media, people in the West particularly would have no idea. I mean, I'm staying with family right now, and I never otherwise watch PBS News, but I was just checking it out. I mean, it was like the difference between what I'm getting on X versus what they're curating and selecting to show was like night and day. I mean, is really quite a stark contrast.
Has anybody seen the name of the beheaded babies in Israel?
No, there was absolutely no names, no evidence, no
Yeah,
footprint,
no
nothing.
names, no address, no location. Where did this take place?
Well, now they're claiming that one of these young women that was attending the rave was beheaded by Hamas, but then
Shani Luke, and even
images
that,
came out that clearly
that
show.
story
I
fell
mean,
apart
she's dead,
in
but her
20.
head was attached. So
The story fell
Yeah.
apart in 24 hours, and you're right, Larry. That is good news. That at least there's practically zero trust, like lower than Congress in mainstream Western media, and it is time for alternate voices to rise. But there's a terrible censorship also on social media. I mean, Elon Musk wanted to get the Starlink system into Gaza, not into Hamas, but to like UN recognized charity organizations, and immediately I think the telecoms. Minister of Israel said we're going to do everything in our power to stop this, because that's what's not supposed to get out. You're not supposed to have the opposite opinion, and that big fight is going on. When it comes to diplomacy, I mean, I see the US not doing anything. Russia is talking to everyone. China is talking to everyone in the neighborhood, and the US is isolated. I think the Guardian ran this article after the catastrophic Friday UNGA, the General Assembly vote, not the Security Council vote, but like 14 nations said, I don't want a ceasefire. 14 in the entire world. And it's just isolated. It's becoming obvious now, as opposed to previous eras where you do what you do.
We're painting ourselves into a corner where we have no other option. We're creating a scenario in which we leave ourselves no other option. Because imagine the outcry that would take place right now if Biden publicly came out and demanded a ceasefire by Israel and said, we're going to have to negotiate this. The killing has to stop. Republicans and Democrats alike, the majority, they'd have his head. He wouldn't be able to do it because the partisan emotion is so hot in the United States. And it's founded in a lot of ignorance and a lot of propaganda. But, we can't ignore that and pretend that it's irrelevant, because it's quite relevant. But that's what worries me so much, is we are pushing ourselves towards a war that we're not ready to fight.
Oh, yeah, I think even Trump joined this bandwagon recently, right?
Oh yeah, no, Trump and Vivek Ramaswamy, they've all, you don't have a single politician that's has national stature that's standing up and saying, wait a second, folks, this has got to stop. We cannot enable this kind of war. No, we're saying, oh yeah, it's going to be a war to the death for Hamas, and in the process, they're going to kill Palestinians. But Netanyahu's made it very clear, hey, if you're a Palestinian, you're in Gaza, you're with Hamas. So your choice is either somehow get out, or you're with Hamas and we'll kill you.
And this could also have huge consequences for, an already terrible U.S. economy. Say if Iran chooses to, cut off oil from the Strait of Hormuz or something like that. The whole thing could cause a huge spike in oil prices, and it's already, there's already massive inflation, and the U.S. economy is falling apart. So this really could have a domino effect, already more than the Ukraine conflict was causing.
Max and Larry, there were two news pieces coming out like one day apart, just one day. They were both on Bloomberg, so sort of economic news. And one of them was the Israeli, I don't know what, gas field stopped producing, and therefore Egypt didn't get its exports, right? And through Egypt, it usually went to the EU, and immediately EU gas prices rose by 7 or 8%. Yeah. This is just a minimal little thing. And on Forbes that evening, I read that get ready for $150 a barrel crude oil prices for that. I mean, that's just... I did this small statistic. This is Europe, so Hungary. We've got about 5 million vehicles on the road, right? One per 2 people. That's the average around here. All things, lorries, trucks, everything. Do you know how many BUVs, battery electric vehicles, BEVs, out of that? It's 16,000. Mm-hmm. So, everything is, if people try to be, we are the beautiful, clean and green and all that, everything is still based on gas and oil, and everything stops immediately, like crashes. If something like what Max described around the Strait of Hormuz, like 30% of the world's oil passes through there to India, to Europe. That's just catastrophic.
You know, that's one of the reasons that since 2019 that Iran has been conducting joint naval exercises with Russia and China.
Yeah.
And China is doing it in part because they recognize that the oil flow out of Saudi Arabia and Iran goes primarily to China. And so, and recognize that the exercise started in February of 2019. That means the planning for this, what they call the Joint Planning Conference, started probably 18 months, anywhere between 12 to 18 months beforehand. That's how these exercises get underway. The three countries sat down together and started planning out what they call the master sequence of events list, what they're going to do, what the objectives of the exercise are, etc. So clearly, Iran, China, and Russia have been thinking this through on a strategic level. And I think that's one of the reasons the Chinese sent their ships into the Persian Gulf last week. And then, they stopped in Kuwait for 5 days, and they weighed anchor, sailed down to Muscat in Oman. Then they took off from Oman, and I think that they're in the the Arabian Sea somewhere. But they're sending a signal that if the West is entertaining any ideas about attacking Iran, they're going to have to contend with both Russia and China. Because just China, from a simple economic survival standpoint, can't afford to let those oil terminals in Iran get blown up. And now, actually, China is in a stronger position now vis-a-vis Russia in terms of Russia being able to supply its oil needs. But still, this is the West is so fixated on destroying Hamas, is they are not recognizing that this movement that has erupted. Because I do remember 67 war. I was 13 then. And then the 73, the Yom Kippur. In neither of those events did you have the kind of unity being displayed among the Arab and Muslim peoples around the world. And even their leaders, in the past, the United States could count on going to the Saudis or to King Abdullah in Jordan or to, now al-Sisi in Egypt, and talking to them behind the scenes and helping them, get in there to calm things down and to keep things from escalating. Well, that's no longer the case. They're all on board with what Israel is doing is a war crime and has to be stopped.
Oh, not least, let me mention this. There was this leaked document, about 10 pages, from the Intelligence Services of Israel. I'm not sure. You've probably seen it. Wikipedia has verified these documents. And apparently the plan was to just bulldoze, to send like 2 million people from Gaza into the Sinai Desert and build up these tent cities, like become a problem of Egypt, which is by no means like economically stable at the moment. They're not. Everything is sorted there, and another 3 million from the West Bank into Jordan. So obviously that's not something either leaders can just take. Oh, it's also ethnic cleansing. Forget about that definition.
Yeah. Well, remember at the outset, Hamas was despised by the Egyptians, and for good reason, because Hamas come out of the Muslim Brothers,
and the
Muslim Brothers were the ones who assassinated Anwar Sadat. I mean, that was punishing Sadat for having the audacity to cut a deal with Israel.
Yeah.
So, the Egyptians were not natural allies of Hamas by any stretch, and that shows you how dramatically things have shifted. That now even Egypt is sympathetic towards Hamas. That's what people need to understand. That this is, the lack of historical memory and context in this is truly frightening.
Yeah.
Richard Medhurst, it's Richard Medhurst, right?
Oh,
Yeah.
He put up, he has this theory about the Leviathan East Mediterranean oil field that I watched very closely, and it was like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit the general situation. And I would like to hear if people acknowledge it, I know it, I'd like to hear their opinions about it. Uh, has anyone else been following it?
Let me just try to sum up, because it's a 9-minute video, too long to play for us here. But he summed up like peerlessly, masterfully, the energy backdrop, the geopolitical, geoenergetic backdrop of this. And one of this was, Saudi Arabia had new connections through Afghanistan. They were not just Belt and Road, but also BRICS 11 countries. They are going to be from the January 1st, 2024. The whole region was getting integrated energy-wise, and the number one gas supply is Russia. We all remember what happened to Nord Stream. It wasn't 6 people on a yacht or something, but anyway, that got separated from Europe. So the second largest proven gas reserves in the world are Iran. And then all of the connecting regions, it couldn't export all the way through Syria because suddenly there was a war there against Assad, which Russia have thankfully stopped. But then this Leviathan field, it's between basically, is that me? No, that's not me, sorry.
No.
Lebanon, a bit of Syria, Lebanon, and Israel off the shore. There's these massive proven gas fields, and suddenly, there's 2 or 3 ports that used to be available in Syria, but the only one is the shining city of Hebron, of Haifa that can export this thing, and that's why he went to the UN. Bibi Netanyahu went to the UN proposing with a big red marker this Middle East, Israel, Europe energy corridor, using things like it's the elimination of the competition. It's, very much the American plan, and they've been talking about we hate Nord Stream for many, many years. You should rely on North American energy resources, not that dirty Russian stuff. And it's just, if you look at that aspect of it, I wish I could sum it up better, man. He did it so well. We should link that video or something.
I haven't seen this particular video, but I mean, I really think you could trace back historically the whole reason for the colonization of Palestine, and the European powers assisting or facilitating the creation of Israel was. I've seen a lot of historians argue that it was about providing access for them, or direct access for them to, to Asia and the East African coastline through the Suez Canal, through the Mediterranean and the Red Sea. That it was about that steam was had become a source of navigation around the time that. That was happening, and that ships
meaning coal, and coal turned into oil and gas, and
exactly, yeah. And it was about ships sailing between Europe and the UK's colonial possessions in China and India at the time. Egypt had sold its shares, its treasury had gone bankrupt. It sold them to the UK under Benjamin Disraeli. So it's a very important region in terms of energy, and obviously, and that was sort of the Britain wanted control of Palestine, and it didn't have the Tsars had the Orthodox, and French had the Catholics, but the British needed a people to adopt to ensure its own interests in the region, and that was sort of one of the energy factors behind it's assisting the Zionist project. I've seen different historians float that idea, and of course, energy has always played a role behind the scenes in these geopolitical conflicts. That's never been any secret, but specifically the Suez Canal in Egypt, its significance, I think, is important.
Yeah, power projection in the region. I think that's the way officially termed. But don't forget, there's one military base that China has not on its soil. That's in Djibouti, which is where the Red Sea connects to the Gulf of Aden. I don't know that Bab el Mandeb Strait. I think basically that's under Chinese supervision now, because they already saw these things coming. They planned for 10, 15, 20 years, not a couple.
Well, and Russia now has a base in Syria, which what factor that could play.
And
Israel, it really seems like Israel and Russia have fallen out of favor and are butting heads over this. I mean, I don't know if you saw the Lakudnik on RT threatening the Kremlin.
I was bringing it up later. Thanks for getting rid of that comment. I don't know who Gateway Pundit is, but we want to talk to Larry, so we don't care.
Well, I'm just curious if Larry's principled stance, his cause some, pro-Israel sites to.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm Gateway regularly publish my stuff, and now they decline to do so just because they don't like and again, I don't try to take a partisan side in this. I'm not one of the, Palestinians forever and, damn the Israel, I try to take it down the middle. And some people don't like that. I've been accused. I've had people on my site at Sonar 21. They've accused me of being a Jew lover and a Jew hater. So, I guess I'm like bi-gender or something. So you just
means you're doing something right, probably.
Yeah, well, I'm just trying to put it into context and help people step back and explain it. It is not, I wish it was not the case, but there are some Israelis that advocate and enforce policies that are reminiscent of what the Nazis did to the Jews in Eastern Europe. And
we should be allowed to say that.
Yeah, and creating ghettos and creating the equivalent of concentration camps. They've not set up mass extermination sites. That's good. But you would think that people who came out of that experience would have more of a tolerance. And in fact, I think here's part of the problem. What a lot of people don't know is in the immediate aftermath of World War II, even though there were a number of people who escaped, survived the Holocaust, went to Israel, they were treated as second-class citizens in Israel because they were assumed that they were weak. They allowed themselves to be captured and to be imprisoned. So they didn't have the status that they do now. They're trotted out now as, the Holocaust survivor, the holy person. But they were never previously embraced in that same way.
I was just I didn't mean to interrupt you say that. Did you see Gilad something, the UN ambassador of Israel?
Yeah, Gilad Erdan.
Bring it out, the yellow stars.
Yeah.
That just made me almost vomit. But yeah,
I mean, he better be careful because then people are going to start researching history and find out that the Zionist movement, in many cases, collaborated with the Nazis in immigrating European Jews from places like Hungary and Germany to Palestine. So they don't want to rehash that because then people will start looking into the actual history and find out that the Zionist project was willing to work hand in glove with the Nazis, and actually they ideologically meet at a certain point in their beliefs about Jews being non-native to Europe. So we should be very careful.
I don't know if any of you have any friends that have gone through a real ugly divorce. So the couple once were madly in love with each other, and then the divorce, and they want to see each other burn in hell. Well, people forget that in the 1980s up through 1988, Israel was supplying Iran with weapons. It wasn't just Iran-Contra. It was broader than that because Israel was so fearful of Iraq and its possible nuclear capability that Israel willingly climbed into bed with Iran, and Iran willingly got into bed with Israel. So now that's how I view them right now. They're like these two former spouses that just hate each other, and they can't remember there was a time when they got along. And so, that's, I still remember that doesn't necessarily mean they can go back and recapture the magic, but it's just important from a historical context to understand that this cartoon version that it was Israel always standing stalwart against the Islamic regime of Iran. Well, that's nonsense.
Well, yeah, and Israel was Netanyahu was one of the biggest lobbyers for the U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003, and they say that Iran to some degree cooperated, at least the IRGC cooperated with the U.S. in the invasion to some degree.
Of course. Well, why not? Why not? Because what we were doing, we were getting rid of a Sunni Ba'athist regime that was a minority in Iraq, and we were installing Shias that, even though they were Arabs, still had relationships with the Shias in Persia or Iran. Hell, Iran was like, they're looking up from their prayer rug going, Allah, I can't believe it.
Yeah, these battlefields get really, really complicated.
Yeah, these alliances, they shift kind of with the weather. I mean, the original Zionist project was mostly atheist. They weren't believers in this land. They believed that God gave us our land. They just didn't believe in God. And now
they didn't care where they got it either.
Of course not. This was the
Argentina,
fifth
Uganda.
Fifth plan, yeah. But in the last week, Benjamin Netanyahu has become like just full of messianic and was looking for prophetic.
He's a television evangelist. That's the word you're looking for.
That's what he's become. Yeah, it's just hard to follow, But yeah,
it seems clear he's wanting to exploit the situation for a couple things, right? He wants to, like we mentioned earlier, he would like to get all those 2 million, 2.5 million people out of Gaza. He'd like to ethnically cleanse the West Bank, and that'll deal with the Palestinian problem once and for all. He'd also, like we talked about, like to control that big natural gas Leviathan reserve that they recently discovered in the Mediterranean. But what is the likelihood that he can actually achieve these goals? Like that's his dream list. That's what he would like to do. But what are the chances that that's even possible? And what is the actual likely outcome of this conflict? I mean, it's all speculation and prognostication, but I mean, does Hezbollah get involved? Does Iran?
He's also wagging the dog to a certain extent. I mean, don't forget he's got these corruption charges, and the whole that's pending, and he wants to put that on hold. And obviously, having a national state of emergency is going to put that on the back burner, at least temporarily. But
he got saved from that. Sorry, but the Council on Foreign Relations, major magazine, foreign policy, foreign magazine, something like that, just hours before the show came out with this big piece that Netanyahu has to go. So there's obviously
even Thomas Friedman was saying that.
Yeah,
say that. As
nobody really likes Netanyahu. Ever since he buddied up to Trump, he's kind of out on with the establishment. But
as for where this goes, I think Larry is the best to answer that question. I'll just say what I've heard from both Iran, China, and Russia, saying just hold back because this can get to a point where it gets unpredictable. That has been their constant mantra for about 2 weeks now. Don't get to the point where it's unpredictable. But that's why I'm in the dark as to what comes after step 1 and 2.
Yeah, I think both Russia and China are counseling restraint right now. I think they recognize that the longer this can be strung out, the greater the political pressure against Netanyahu in country, because Netanyahu is not wildly popular at all. All they've had is this rally around the flag effect that we saw in the United States in the immediate aftermath of the whole 9/11 events. So I think partly of what Russia and China are counting on is that there can actually be some sane political leadership come in that will back down and then try to de-escalate this. However, they are not ignoring the possibility that this could ratchet up quickly should the crazies in, the Victoria Nulands and the Bibi Netanyahus decide to launch an attack, particularly on Iran. Because the effort to pin all of this on Iran is very, very real in terms of their threats. And that they ignore the fact that Iran's got a very robust military, air defense system, and its alliance with China and Russia give it a lot of options. So, I think we're ignoring or not seeing fully what the Russians and Chinese are doing on the diplomatic front. Clearly, they have the initiative. They've got access, and there are more of the different Arab and Muslim nations listening to them and aligning with them, and they recognize that the United States is completely untrustworthy, and that the United States history is replete with abandoning allies where we say, I've always said, when you hear the United States say, we got your back, that's like hearing your prison inmate say that to you. You got to be concerned about what's coming next.
Do you know, about this time last year, I did a meme where Ashraf Ghani was sitting in front of Biden next to the fireplace in the White House, because that was the time when Zelensky sat in that same little seat at the White House. I'm just like, come on, have a think. And here we are, you know, a year later, where Ashraf Ghani escaped with many suitcases of money, like off. Some of it was left, I think, on the tarmac next to his helicopter because it didn't fit. And same is in store for Zelensky. I'm just...
Well, his daughter
Middle
is
East
an artist who lives here in Brooklyn, New York.
Getting back to the Middle East region, I think you're completely right. The commenter with the dog, I don't know, he said they're the adults in the room. I completely agree. I saw this, the biggest meeting, like everybody was there in the Russian Federation leadership, which happened yesterday. And after that, Putin made this speech. He said, yes, when you see women and children suffering, he said, your knuckles get white and you want to cry, but we cannot afford to make an emotional decision. That was part of his speech. We have to think calmly about the consequences and the next step. He's urging that. China is obviously urging that. And Iran is one of those aspects that are urging that, no matter how they paint it. I mean, Larry, I know you know what Iran is. I'm just afraid. You mentioned Newland. I'll mention Kagan and these people. I don't think they have any idea what Iran is in 2023.
No, none. And you know, and it even goes to the United States likes to portray Iran as this great terrorist state. And I wrote a piece 3 years ago, and it's held up. It was posted at Sonar 21, laying out the actual evidence of Iranian involvement with terrorism, which is, you know, very, very little. But the United States has to portray Iran as this great terrorist, ignoring the fact that the United States is funding activities and attacks by the Mujahideen al-Khalq, a terrorist organization that was on the list of foreign terrorist groups, but the United States conveniently took it off once we decided we wanted to support them.
And they killed Americans too.
Yeah, and then the fact that we were involved with Israel in the assassination of a nuclear scientist inside Iran.
Oh, so, yes.
Yeah, I mean, there's always a context to this, and the hatred of Iran for America was not without foundation. And the problem is, in the United States, we refuse to take any responsibility for any of the mayhem and chaos we've been causing around the world now since Vietnam and preceding Vietnam.
Not to throw Max under the bus, but he's actually been on Iranian TV a lot, so take that for what it's worth. He does
guilty as charged.
Good for you.
Great analysis.
I've done most of my learning in this last year about Iran, what it actually is, and it's been an eye-opening experience. Like when the rapprochement became reality between Russia and Iran, I think Putin kind of apologized, said, we thought you were mullahs with weapons, you know? That was untrustworthy people within Russia, which he means the Western liberals. That's the picture they painted to us of you, and we're really sorry about that. That's when Russia became the most sanctioned country in the world, and it reached out to the second or third most sanctioned country in the world, and they got to actually know each other. Like Iran, the constitution, the word scientific is enshrined in there. They have equivalent STEM, like engineering, mathematics graduates, as the United States does, with just 90 million people. The United States has 330, I think, or something like that. It's an intensely capable, very, very scientific society. And just, I don't think people, the Newlands of the world especially, are aware of that.
Well, remember what we started off the discussion today talking about the United States using a divide and conquer strategy. And that was very evident with, you know, we had this war going in Yemen that we were supporting the Saudi side ostensibly, because the other side, the Houthis, were being supported by Iran. And we wanted to keep that going because we saw this as a way to have a proxy war against Iran, and that would keep both Saudis and Iranians on opposite sides of the fence. And when the Chinese brokered that annulment of the conflict and brought them together, that all of a sudden, you know, the Shia in Iran and the Sunni in Saudi Arabia, and the Saudis' concern had always been because a lot of its oil workers in the eastern provinces came out of Iran and were Shia Muslims. So they were always fearful of this internal uprising. Well, now that the Saudis and Iranians have full-fledged diplomatic relations and aren't literally trying to kill each other, it has changed the face of the Middle East, and it blew up U.S. policy. Because once that thread was unraveled, then all of a sudden the isolation of Syria disappeared. Syria is welcomed back into the Arab League, and all of a sudden this, the U.S. justification for occupying land in Syria, which is basically all about oil, has been undermined. So it's, this, and all of this started, if you think about it, because of the U.S. response and the provocation of leading Russia to have to launch the military operation in Ukraine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Carlo may need to go. I'm not
Oh.
sure if I'm not trying to push him out, but he mentioned he couldn't stay more than an hour. It's been about an hour.
Yeah, neither can I. I'm sorry, but I would love to continue.
Oh,
Yeah, I should get going. I don't have much energy today, anyway. So
Well, thanks for joining us, and don't let me don't let me kick you out, but don't stay on our account either. If you have to go, just please hit the little X at the top.
Yeah,
I will get going. I will get going. I have to see my doctor.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Carlo.
Thanks.
see you later, Carlo. Yeah.
Thank you.
We mentioned earlier about how Biden, even if he wanted to do the right thing, it would be political suicide to do the right thing. Is there any thoughts about why that is? I mean, I have some opinions.
Well, when you look at the amount of money that comes into these political campaigns from Jewish businessmen, it's a significant factor. The Palestinians and the Muslims don't have that kind of dough walking around, and it's just it's the reality in the United States. It's a powerful lobby. Mearsheimer and Walt learned the hard way that even if you try to write about it and talk about it objectively, you get attacked as an anti-Semite. So that's why, in order to assure that I'm never accused of being an anti-Semite, I keep a mezuzah on my front door.
You might just think you're a lawyer.
Hey, come and look that, and I've even got a blessed part of the Torah inside, as his practice. But you've got to, if you've got a friend, I think Doug McGregor said it the right way just yesterday. He says, if you've got a friend that you care about and you see them ready to commit suicide, you don't stand by and do nothing. You try to get them help. You try to stop. And otherwise it winds up in a tragedy. And Israel is taking actions that are likely to destroy itself. That is the irony here. Because if Turkey and Iran get engaged with this militarily, Israel is done. They're toast. And I don't care how many nuclear weapons they have. They won't be able to fight their way out of this, even with the United States fighting alongside. It will be a disaster, a global disaster. And so that's what's at stake. That's why you're trying to say, hey, guys, can everybody take a big, deep breath, put down your guns, take a step back, stop the killing, because this is going to end badly.
On that point, I collected 4 statements, and it looks like the memo went out, and that's what really scares me. You've probably seen at least 2 of these. One was Hillary Clinton, I think, on CBS television. Basically her. Then there was Kirby's press briefing. Keir Starmer of the British Labour Party had a even third one, and Netanyahu. They all said, or sort of paraphrased, that a ceasefire means surrendering to Hamas or is in the interest of Hamas at this moment, right? And just Keir Starmer went further because he's the British guy. He's always going to go further than the US masters, and he said a ceasefire may risk further violence. These are just, they're a tiny minority in the world, even within the Western powers. But it seems the memo went out. And that's what's scary. But despite the warnings, despite the caution coming from Russia, from China, from the major diplomatic players in the world, they don't seem, they seem to be like this, Yeah.
Well, there was also been a number of articles, obviously, about the huge profits to be reaped by the defense industry that have come out this week, and that I mean, obviously, the role of AIPAC and the Israel lobby can't be overstated. But by the same token, Biden is also in a rock and a hard place in regard to supporting a ceasefire with, you know, the huge profits that are going to be made from this by all the defense giants, who obviously that's another reason a U.S. president would be committing political suicide by supporting a ceasefire. But of course, the counter to that is how the public perception is going to react to this ground invasion that's imminent, and you know, as the images start to continue to come out, how the U.S. public or the Western public at large is going to react. You know, it really remains to be seen, because and Biden is, you know, with the election year coming up and the economic factors that could come from this. I mean, it's really going to be interesting to see. And but of course, again, the sickening part is that while all this is playing out, Palestinians are just going to be slaughtered in mass. And yeah.
I was going to bring in the economic aspects of this because that was the headline. I think 7% was the big spike in Raytheon, in Northrop Grumman, in the big weapons companies immediately. And I think the title, I'm just going to cheat here because these were two separate articles. And the one was, what Israel-Hamas war means for the defense stocks. That was 7. But then the NBC came up with a second one, the billions in Ukraine defense. Remember, that's 600 days ago. So for 600 days, they have been doing this. They didn't translate into actual U.S. jobs. No matter what the employment statistics come out, I really believe they're very highly fudged or twisted to look at a very healthy economy. Because when I look around in Europe, I'm pretty sure it should be the same in all three of you are in the United States. You look at food prices, look at energy, petrol, transportation costs. I don't think any of them are in the green for people or going down or anywhere near that. And
Not
imagine
at all.
I mean, it's not just the public images of horrific scenes, but if this kicks off, I mean, just imagine Great Depression 2.0. Not a prediction.
Yeah,
but
that's not an exaggeration at all. I think that absolutely could be the case. I mean, the inflation here has gotten so bad that I'm, you know, personally having to consider leaving because this has just gotten so out of control. And this is just going to pour gasoline on the fire.
Larry, you mentioned, you know, Zionist contributions to both political parties. I remember reading the Jerusalem Post or something, and, you know, donors who identify as Jewish were like, it was like 50% of the Republican Party and like 75% of it was really high, like a really large majority coming from a very, very small minority. But in addition to that, you have Christian Zionists. So it's not just people who identify as Jewish, but it's people who identify as Christian, who have had decades and decades of pro-Israel propaganda coming from the pulpit. People like John Hagee.
Billy Bob, quick question. Just, do you remember this name? And you were a lucky man if you don't. Do you remember Michelle Bachmann?
Oh, yes.
Oh, yes.
Oh, my God. She came out.
Very smart woman. Very smart woman.
Oh, one of the dumbest people on earth. But she came out with an apocalyptic Christian version of what you
yeah, I mean, that's what people need to understand. If the Simplicius, I don't know if you're familiar with his Substack.
Oh, yes.
Simplicius just did a thing on the eschatology, you know, the doctrine of last days. So, you know, within evangelical Christendom, there is always there are very explicit prophecies in Isaiah, for example, about the reestablishment of Israel. And it's always couched in terms of the last days. If you read particularly Isaiah chapter 12, it's pretty alarming stuff. And so, you know, and I was raised in an evangelical Christian faith. So I was, you know, heard about this from my, you know, start of my memory around 8, 9, about that this was all preparation for the return of Jesus. Well, on the Islamic side, they also have this belief of a return of a messianic figure that is set off by all these cataclysmic events of war and rumor of war. And then on top of it, within these ultra-right Jewish sects, they have the same kind of belief. Now, the odd thing, the irony of it all is within each of those separate cones, let's call them cones to separate them, each one believes that they've got the special relationship with God, that they've got the direct line to God, that they're the special people. And all these others are the sinners and the guilty who are going to be destroyed. Well, unfortunately, these kinds of beliefs are very strong. The current Speaker of the House, Michael Johnson, no relation, he genuinely embraces that, believes that this is the fulfillment of prophecy. And, I also learned early on that the people that prophesy and claim to speak for God, a lot of times may be real well-intentioned, but they're wrong. I remember when I was 10 years old, listening to this old preacher. He was 92 years old, a guy named Oscar Case. And he stood up at this outdoor service. It was, in the summertime in Independence, Missouri. And he said, God has spoken to me, and I have been promised that I will live to see the return of Jesus. Now I'm 10 years old and I'm going, oh my God, that's going to be pretty quick here because he's not going to live that much longer. Well, Oscar died. Jesus didn't come back. And here we are now 50 years later, or 58 years later in my case. So my point in this is not to disparage the theological positions that all these people take, but the reality is many interpreted the reestablishment of Israel in 1948 as the fulfillment of Scripture. And that set in motion the doomsday clock, tick, 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 to the Battle of Armageddon. And it's almost as if some of these people believe that they are going to unleash, if God's not going to do it, I might as well get it started. That kind of attitude. And that's what's so dangerous about this.
The whole slogan,
scary as hell.
Land without people, people without a land, comes from evangelical Zionists that preceded the actual Zionist movement. The Zionists adopted that slogan.
I'm not well versed in religion, but Larry, did you say Isaiah was that prophecy was from your evangelical childhood? Because now we know who Netanyahu was talking to.
Look at chapter 12, chapters 11 and 12 in Isaiah. That's in all Old Testament New, all Bibles that deal with the Old Testament. I noticed one of your commentators, someone doesn't have the balls to put their real name in there. Agua Fiestas. Agua Sucia. Because she said, saying that this has nothing to do with religion. Well, you're ignorant. You're stupid. You don't know what you're talking about. It has everything to do with religion. The problem is you got to pick which side of the religion you're rooting for. Because the Muslims believe that it's God's on their side, the Jews believe God's on their side, and the Christians believe God's on their side. And they don't all believe that they're on the same side. And if you think this is about anything else other than religion, you're a moron. Sorry.
Even with the economic underpinnings we described, religion is always
the driving force.
Yeah, it can't be denied as one of the major factors at play. I don't know if I would say it's the only factor, but yeah, it's definitely undeniably. I mean, I just watched this documentary, The Gatekeepers, last night, which is about the Shin Bet, and they cover a whole section where the Jewish underground, which was a very far right,
the Irgun and Stern gangs.
Yeah, and they attempted I believe it was in the 1980s to blow up the dome on top of the Mount Temple in Jerusalem to, according to them, try and usher in exactly what you're talking about, the return of the Messiah and all that.
So, there's a principle, like a Marxist principle, I would argue, the interconnectedness of everything. So, everything is related. So religion definitely plays a part. I think what Agua Fiestas is, not to defend him, but he's saying there's a huge injustice going on, right? The injustice of Zionism, where they want to make a Jewish state in a country that was 95% non-Jewish for the past 1,000 years. And there's, that took, violence, ethnic cleansing, and land theft to create that state. And now you have people in Gaza and the West Bank in concentration camps looking over their previous homes. So in that way, it's not religious, but of course, religion is connected. I mean, religion is a big part of it.
Well, I mean,
But I wouldn't say,
I'm
I would agree with Max. It's not the only thing.
no, I'm not
Can
saying,
I-
but
go ahead, Larry.
I just point out that one of the real ironies here is, as you noted earlier, I think, Billy, that the Zionists are not religious, and in
It's
fact,
true.
do not practice Judaism.
They believe God gave
And-
it to them, but they don't believe in God. That is
and
absolutely
some of-
Certainly didn't start as a Jewish
Yeah.
movement.
And some of the most religious practicing Jews, the Hasidim,
they oppose Zionism.
They hate
they
Netanyahu.
they oppose Israel.
and
Yeah.
Zionism,
Theodore
yes.
Herzl was not particularly religious.
Yeah.
Which is why when Zionism was founded, they considered other locations. As I was saying earlier, there was the Uganda scheme. They considered a Jewish state in Argentina or Chile, I believe. It was the most radical Zionists that convinced Herzl that no, we absolutely need we need to colonize Palestine. So it's
This
certainly
might not be popular, but I'm in Hungary, so Eastern Europe, other side of the Iron Curtain when it was here, and
Right,
we learned that religion is always a three-edged sword. There's our side, there's their side, and then there's the truth. When Marx argued, that it's the opium of the people, everybody knows that, but they don't know it continues. It's the sigh of the oppressed. It is a heart in a heartless world, which means what Marx said was people need this at a certain development, that certain tragedies happen in your life. And it was perfectly understood that it can be used for all kinds of purposes. Example, there's Cardinal Minsanti in Hungary, an absolute monster. He was a mass killing bastard who used it to enslave and to destroy. That is Roman Catholicism. The same Roman Catholicism that was used in South America, which is called liberation theology, to actually free people. That's the exact same. There's the Zionist form of Judaism. Then there's I think Central Station in New York was recently packed full of Jewish people who said, ceasefire now and end to the Zionist project. Those are Jews as well. And by the way, Arab people are Semitic as well. That's as far as that stupid anti-Semitic trope goes.
Have any of you been to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem?
No, of course I know it, but never.
So okay, it's worth the trip, because number one, the person that holds the keys to lock and unlock the church, it's this massive structure, is the head imam of the mosque there in Jerusalem, because the Christians don't trust each other enough to let any one of them hold it, so they trust the Muslim to hold it. That's number one.
Okay, that's awesome.
Number two, when you go into that church, it is a massive structure. The different sects within Christianity occupy different parts of the church, of the physical plot. So you've got Eastern Orthodox, you've got Greek Orthodox, you've got Russian Orthodox, you have the Catholics, you have the Ethiopians. It's just, and the reason that they bring the Muslim in from outside to sort of referee is because they all fight with each other on the inside. I mean, and I'm not talking about hurling insults. I mean, literally physical blows they've had in the past. So it just, again, it's a further illustration of sort of the perversity of the religious part of this, that this place is as dedicated, they believe, to where Jesus was buried, to that they can't even come down to an agreement amongst themselves, and they have to look out to the so-called unsaved Muslim to referee the place. So it's sort of a metaphor for what's going on over there.
Yeah, it should be the model for the region, if not the world. Syria is the one place where practicing Jews, Muslims, Christians, they're just next door. They're the next family. They're intermarried as well. It's just one society. And I'd like to bring in Russia because we all know something happened at Dagestan airport, a terrible thing. Like maybe we should just address it quickly, that immediately everyone in authority, including Putin, Maria Zakharova, came down on this is unacceptable. Is there? I also saw the Chechen leader Ramzan Kadyrov and his his main commander, Apti Alaudinov, basically saying the same thing. This is unacceptable at any level, and the full prosecution will happen because this is Russia. We have multiple people, multiple ethnicities and religions. And one thing that went viral on Russian Telegram's channel was, I found it beautiful. I wish we had a clip cue, but we don't. Was there was a Muslim Russian soldier, he's Russian as well, sort of watched over by a Pravoslav, a Russian Orthodox soldier, and basically what the people who videoed it, they was talking about, that this is what is normal, what normal Russia should be. Because it's a big multi-people society, and they managed to fix that thing. And it does look like it came from external forces, including intelligence services. But Larry,
really,
I wouldn't. I'd agree.
That was my first thought.
Yeah, and immediately cracked down on, which I was very happy for, because you might see some things in Europe, people painting horrible things, like all the way back to the 1930s, horrible things.
But the reaction of those people at that airport in Dagestan it further underscores the effect that Erdogan's rhetoric is having. Throughout that. This is not much. These are Muslims.
I think
these are Tartars. These are Tartars.
People.
Yeah, they're Turkish. They're really in their background, and so it is. Erdogan's words are resonating to the point that people were willing to do something terrible, and it is a credit to the Russian government, to Putin, and the various players that they quashed it immediately and put it down. But that's the only card the West has to play: sanctions or military intervention of some sort, because you can't persuade the world to come along your way because you're showing a better way.
Yeah, the old divide and conquer, or chaos, like they mentioned in China, both Shoigu and this commander.
Hey, I'm gonna have to jump. I've got another interview coming up here.
Very generous.
Thank you for being so generous with your time, Larry. It's been an hour and 20 minutes. We really appreciate it. I hope you'll join us again sometime. But thank you very much.
Great listening to you, Larry. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Max and Ben. It was and Billy. I enjoyed the opportunity. Have mouth, we'll travel.
You too.
Take care, guys. Bye.
Bye. Oh, it was great.
Yeah, that's great that he was able to join us. He's got quite a busy schedule. So what else, guys? Like I said, it's been about an hour and 25 minutes. Max, you mentioned you might need to leave. I don't have like a hard deadline, but I should get going. But this was really great. It was great to be on with Ben. I've seen other roundtables, but I think this is the first time we've ever been on the same one together. That's true.
Yeah, nice to meet you too, Max. Yeah.
Yeah, and you really with Carlo earlier, it was like looking at Marx and Lenin on the same panel. I mean, you really got that going.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm glad you didn't call him Trotsky. It's Lenin.
Yeah, because of the glasses, someone called me a trot, and I was so angry. But yeah.
Oh man, no, you got to dye it white and get the Colonel Sanders thing going if you really want to look
That's
like
true.
Trotsky.
Exactly.
Max, you got to stop working on Tuesdays and Fridays, because I understand you're working a lot of the days that we have our program.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Hopefully that'll change soon.
Maybe if I paid you to come on, I would have better luck.
Cough it up.
Okay.
No.
Okay. Yeah, no, I'll end it here. So thank you very much, guys.
Thank you, guys.
We'll talk after. Thanks everyone for watching. We'll be back on Friday for episode 30.